Dust was everywhere. Her eyes, her ears, her hair. Curled up as she was, she could feel it crusting her clothes, and it crunched under her sandals as she shifted her feet. Mella curled tighter. Forcing her eyes open, she squinted past the bright splodge the flash had imprinted on her vision, and frowned at her dress, so bright and pretty moments before. It was grey and bedraggled, dulled by powdery dust, which also covered her bare arms. Rubbing her hands together, she remembered a day at the beach with the family. It felt like sand between her fingers, but sand didn't belong here. Mella tried to think. They had just come in from the shops. Mum had put all the bags on the kitchen table, and Mella was helping to unpack, studying the tins and parcels before arranging them on the shelves. Then a bang, loud, a little distant, but enough to shake the house. Mum had frowned. Then there was another, and yet another. They had run outside, Patch the dog with them, barking. Billowing puffs of smoke and dust were erupting all around them in a world of noise. Their neighbours were out too. Mum was shouting across to Ilse next door, who stood in her garden, wild-eyed and tearing at her hair. She was usually such a happy, laughing lady. Something bad was happening. With a monstrous roar, the sky had exploded, then nothing. She couldn't have slept, but there was a gap in remembering, and now here she was. Where was Patch? Where was Mum? There was a deep falling feeling in her stomach, like when she thought Dad wasn't coming home. She stood, shaking the dust from her dress as best she could. Turning to look at the house, Mella saw for the first time the ruined skeleton of the roof, the outside walls and the stairs of the building, a ragged testimony to what had been. Patch? Patch? She thought she had spoken. She felt she had spoken, but could hear nothing, just a ringing in her ears, like Mr. Grumpy up the road's alarm. She shook her head, but the ringing didn't stop. There were people stumbling in the clouds of dust, ghostly figures in a world without colour. Mum? Mum? She knew for sure she had spoken, could feel the vibration in her throat, but the sound of her voice was a distant dream. Seeing a bit of wood that was maybe a bit of the garage roof, she stumbled over the rubble towards it. Mum had been there, grabbing Patch's collar to stop him from running up the road. She started shivering. This was bad. Very, very bad. She was as certain of that as when Gran had died and all the grown-ups sat around with droopy faces, trying but failing to smile and be cheerful when she spoke to them. Then she caught sight of a glinting in the rubble a few paces away. Stepping closer, she saw a shiny thing, a ring, Mum's ring. What was it doing down there? She knelt and touched it, then pulled. She couldn't move it, but some of the dust fell away, and she saw that it was Mum's hand, then her arm, draped in the flowery fabric of the blouse she put on in the morning. Mum, wake up! Her voice still inaudible, she plaited gently, not wanting to hurt her. Mum's skin was limp and cool, her hand floppy. She felt ill. Nothing made sense. She called Patch again. Patch, come, good dog. But there was no answering bark or scamper of paws like usual. Looking around, Mella started to feel very alone. Lost in a park alone. Ilse seemed to have disappeared, and she could barely see where the road was. The houses nearby were smudges in the gloom that had enveloped everything. She started to walk. Someone at the shops would know what to do. Alfie the baker or Mrs. T at the dress shop. She headed off to where she thought the shops might be. In the swirling murk she glimpsed other walkers, some rushing, some lurching and staggering through a muffled world. She thought about how long it took when she went with Mum and Patch. All she could see was shadowy piles of bricks and wood and dented and smashed cars. She gasped as a small creature scampered past her, brushing her legs with its powdered fur, sending tickly shivers right through her. The ground started rumbling and vibrating, and she glanced around, wondering what was coming. She leapt out of the way of a huge shape hurtling past her, only just in time. It seemed like a truck, but big, really big. She squinted, searching for the pavement. She hadn't realised she was on the road. Mum would be so cross. She felt warmth crawl down her cheeks and touched it with a dry finger. She was crying. Where was everyone? What should she do? Had the shops gone too? Her foot hit something and she almost tripped, teetering in the air between standing and falling. Then she saw something she recognised, the big sign for Brown's Cafe. It was half hanging off, but at least she knew where she was. Sort of. She looked for the gate into the terrace, which she knew should be there, and finding it open, she stepped through. The white tables with their bright yellow umbrellas were tumbled all over as though an angry wind had crashed through. She could see someone inside. Maybe it was Maisie, the waitress. Mella's shoulders drooped as she saw that it was Mrs. Brown, the one who never smiled. She was dusting and polishing about as fast as she worked. The dust settled back on everything. Mella watched the sour-faced woman work. After a while, she paused her frantic dusting and looked straight at Mella, lips moving, but still the only sound was ringing in the girl's ears. The woman became animated, her lips moving faster, her mouth opening and closing in angry bursts, her eyes narrow and mean. She banged the cup she was holding down onto the counter and started wagging a finger at Mella, who in her silent world struggled to understand. When the woman lunged wild-eyed from behind the counter, Mella turned and ran. The shop was nearby, the one where Mum let her buy treats. Suddenly very thirsty, she decided to try there. She knew they had the drinks she liked. The pavement was bumpy and uneven with broken bricks and other debris from the smashed buildings, and the shop windows were broken and jagged. She stepped through the open door, bracing in case there was another angry person. The contents of the once pretty place were wrecked, stuff strewn everywhere. The door to the drinks cabinet was half hanging off, but there were still some cartons and cans. Reaching for her favourite, Mella stopped. Mum wouldn't want her to have that. She chose it anyway, smiling when she managed to undo the ring pull. The liquid was sweet and still cool as it trickled down her dry throat. A pang of hunger took her to where the snacks would be. Choosing a bit of what Mum would, and a bit of what she liked, she took a pack of crisps and an apple and chocolate. There was no one to ask her for money as she found herself a little bag and put more drinks and some bars into it, the ones she sometimes had on long car journeys. Glancing behind the counter as she wondered where everyone was, Mella saw a dust-covered boot. A whole person came into view as she stepped towards it. Very still and broken somehow. The arms splayed above the head, except she couldn't see the head. She looked away and fled, skipping over boxes and bricks and broken glass, up the ravaged pavement, past the ruined houses, as fast as she could back home, the bag banging her legs.